Captain Marcus Thornfield had walked the corridors of Raven's Hollow Castle for 15 years, his boots echoing against the ancient stone floors in a rhythm that had become as natural as breathing. Tonight, however, something felt different. The autumn wind howled through the battlements with unusual ferocity, and shadows seemed to dance where they shouldn't in the flickering torchlight. It was well past midnight when Marcus decided to extend his patrol route beyond the usual chambers. The recent tensions in the kingdom had everyone on edge, and Queen Isabel had specifically requested increased security measures. Political unrest was brewing in the southern provinces, and whispers of discontent had reached even the castle walls. As Marcus turned down a corridor that led to the older wing of the castle, he noticed something that made him pause. A faint light emanated from beneath a door that should have been sealed. The room belonged to the late Queen Eleanor, Prince Alexander's mother, who had died 20 years ago. By royal decree, her chambers had been left untouched, a shrine to her memory that even the cleaning staff avoided. Marcus approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. The door stood slightly ajar, which was impossible. He had personally checked the locks on this door countless times, and it required a special key that only 3 people in the entire kingdom possessed: King Frederick, Prince Alexander, and the royal chamberlain. Pushing the door open slowly, Marcus stepped into a room frozen in time. Dust particles danced in the beam of his lantern, and the air carried the musty scent of years gone by. Everything appeared exactly as it should be. The 4-poster bed with its deep blue curtains, the ornate writing desk positioned near the tall windows, the portrait of Queen Eleanor hanging above the fireplace, her kind eyes seeming to watch over the space she had once called home. But something was wrong. The writing desk, which should have been empty according to palace records, had papers scattered across its surface. Fresh papers, by the look of them. Marcus moved closer, his curiosity overriding his caution. The documents appeared to be letters, written in an elegant hand that he recognized as belonging to Lady Catherine Ashford, the king's current wife and Prince Alexander's stepmother. But these were not ordinary correspondence. As Marcus read the first few lines, his blood ran cold. The letters detailed a secret that had been buried for 2 decades. They spoke of another child, born to a union that predated King Frederick's marriage to Queen Eleanor. A son named Thomas, hidden away and raised in obscurity while his half-brother Alexander grew up believing he was the sole heir to the Valdorian throne. Marcus's hands trembled as he read further. Lady Catherine's letters revealed that she had discovered this secret shortly after her marriage to King Frederick and had been secretly supporting Thomas for years. More shocking still, the letters indicated that Thomas was not just alive, but had been living under an assumed identity within the very castle where Marcus stood. The pieces of a puzzle that had never made sense suddenly clicked into place. Lord Thomas Ashford, Lady Catherine's supposed nephew who had arrived at court 5 years ago, was not her nephew at all. He was the king's firstborn son, the rightful heir to the throne. Marcus sank into the chair at the writing desk, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had discovered. His loyalty to the crown had always been absolute, but now he faced an impossible situation. Prince Alexander, the man he had sworn to protect, the man he had watched grow from a boy into a capable leader, was not the legitimate heir. The implications were staggering. If this information became public, it would throw the kingdom into chaos. The nobility who had pledged their allegiance to Alexander, the common people who had accepted him as their future king, the neighboring kingdoms who had signed treaties based on the assumption of Alexander's legitimacy, all of it would crumble. But there was more. Hidden beneath the letters was a small leather journal, its pages filled with Lady Catherine's careful documentation of events from 20 years past. She wrote of King Frederick's first love, a nobleman's daughter named Isabella Marlowe, who had died giving birth to Thomas. The king, devastated by grief and political pressure from his advisors, had abandoned the infant and entered into an arranged marriage with Queen Eleanor months later. According to the journal, Lady Catherine had learned of Thomas's existence through old servants who had been present at his birth. She had tracked him down, found him living as a ward of distant relatives who believed him to be an orphan, and carefully orchestrated his return to court under the guise of family connection. The journal revealed Lady Catherine's complex motivations. She genuinely cared for Thomas, seeing in him the lost child who deserved his birthright. But she also feared for her own future. If King Frederick died and Alexander ascended to the throne, her position would become precarious. As the stepmother who had never produced an heir of her own, she would be at the mercy of Alexander's goodwill. With Thomas's true identity known and his claim established, Lady Catherine would secure her position as the mother figure to the rightful king. The political calculation was as brilliant as it was dangerous. Marcus found himself thinking of Prince Alexander, who at 28 had dedicated his life to preparing for kingship. Alexander was intelligent, compassionate, and genuinely beloved by both the court and the common people. He had spent years studying statecraft, military strategy, and diplomacy. He had sacrificed personal happiness for duty, turning down marriage proposals that would have brought him joy but little political advantage. Then there was Thomas, who had lived at court for 5 years under false pretenses but had proven himself to be equally capable. He served as Lady Catherine's advisor on economic matters and had shown remarkable insight into trade and taxation issues. The courtiers respected him, though they had no idea of his true significance. He was quiet where Alexander was charismatic, analytical where Alexander was intuitive, but both men possessed the intelligence and integrity that made for good leadership. The cruel irony was not lost on Marcus. The kingdom had been blessed with 2 potential rulers, both worthy of the crown, but circumstances would force them into opposition. As Marcus continued reading, he discovered that Lady Catherine had been slowly building a case for Thomas's legitimacy. She had gathered evidence, secured testimonies from old servants, and even obtained the official birth records that had been hidden away in church archives. Everything needed to press Thomas's claim was meticulously documented and ready to be presented. The final letter in the collection was dated just 3 days ago. In it, Lady Catherine wrote of her intention to reveal the truth to Thomas himself, who had apparently been living his entire life unaware of his royal heritage. She planned to tell him everything, and then, together, they would decide how to proceed. Marcus realized that this discovery could not be kept secret much longer. If Lady Catherine had already told Thomas the truth, then the confrontation that would reshape the kingdom was imminent. The question was not whether this secret would come to light, but when and how. Standing up from the desk, Marcus carefully gathered the papers and journal, knowing that he held the future of the kingdom in his hands. His loyalty to Prince Alexander was unwavering, but his duty to the truth was equally strong. As a man who had sworn an oath to protect the crown, what was his obligation when the crown itself was in question? The wind outside seemed to grow even stronger, rattling the windows of Queen Eleanor's chamber as if the spirits of the past were stirring. Marcus looked up at the portrait of the late queen, wondering if she had ever suspected that her husband harbored such a secret. Had she known that the son she raised as the heir might one day face a challenge to his birthright? As he prepared to leave the chamber, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would not go directly to Prince Alexander with this information, nor would he immediately report to King Frederick. Instead, he would seek out Thomas and observe him, trying to determine if the man already knew the truth of his identity. The next few days would be crucial. If Thomas knew and was preparing to press his claim, the kingdom needed to be ready for the upheaval that would follow. If he remained ignorant, then perhaps there was still time to find a solution that would preserve the peace. Marcus extinguished his lantern and stepped back into the corridor, sealing the door behind him. As he walked through the sleeping castle, he could not shake the feeling that everything had changed in the space of an hour. The familiar walls suddenly seemed to hold secrets in every shadow, and the peaceful kingdom he had sworn to protect felt as fragile as glass. In the royal quarters, Prince Alexander slept peacefully, unaware that his entire world was about to be turned upside down. Down the hall, King Frederick lay beside Lady Catherine, neither of them knowing that the secret they had guarded for so long was no longer safe. And somewhere in the castle, Thomas Ashford continued his life of unknowing exile from his true identity, though perhaps not for much longer. The discovery that would reshape a kingdom had been made, and there was no way to undo what had been learned. Marcus Thornfield, loyal guard and keeper of unwanted secrets, walked through the pre-dawn darkness knowing that he would soon be forced to choose between the man he had served faithfully and the truth that demanded recognition. The game that would determine the future of Valdoria was about to begin, and every move from this point forward would carry consequences that would echo through generations. In the silence of the sleeping castle, the only sound was the steady beat of Marcus's footsteps and the whisper of autumn wind that seemed to carry the promise of change on its breath. The morning sun cast long shadows across the castle courtyard as Thomas Ashford made his way to the eastern tower, where Lady Catherine had requested his presence for what she described as a matter of utmost importance. For 5 years, he had answered such summons without question, grateful for the woman who had taken him in when he had nowhere else to go. Thomas had always wondered about his origins. The family who raised him had been kind but distant, claiming to know little about his parents beyond the fact that they had died when he was an infant. When Lady Catherine appeared in his life with claims of distant kinship and an invitation to court, it had seemed like a gift from the gods. Finally, he would have a place where he belonged. Yet belonging had proven more elusive than he had expected. Despite Lady Catherine's patronage and his growing reputation as an advisor, Thomas always felt like an outsider looking in. He watched Prince Alexander command respect and affection with natural ease, observed the easy camaraderie between the prince and his inner circle, and wondered what it would feel like to be so secure in one's place in the world. The Eastern Tower was Lady Catherine's private retreat, a place where she could work without interruption. As Thomas climbed the winding stairs, he noticed that his usual confidence was replaced by an odd sense of nervousness. Something in Lady Catherine's manner the previous evening had seemed different, more intense than usual. He found her standing at the tall window that looked out over the kingdom's rolling hills. She was dressed in deep purple silk, her graying hair arranged in the elaborate style favored by noble ladies. But her usually composed demeanor showed cracks of tension. "Thomas," she said without turning around, "thank you for coming so promptly." "Of course, my lady. You said the matter was urgent." Lady Catherine finally faced him, and Thomas was surprised to see tears glistening in her eyes. In all his years of knowing her, he had never seen her display such emotion. "Please, sit down." She gestured to a chair near the fireplace. "What I am about to tell you will change everything you believe about yourself and your place in this world." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. "My lady, you're frightening me." "I should be frightening you," Lady Catherine replied, moving to pour wine from a decanter despite the early hour. "What I have kept hidden for your own protection can no longer remain secret. Events are moving beyond my control, and you must know the truth before others discover it." She handed him the goblet with trembling hands. "Thomas, you are not my nephew. You are not even distantly related to the Ashford family." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. "I don't understand. You said my mother was your cousin's daughter, that I lied." Lady Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. "I lied about everything because the truth was too dangerous. Thomas, you are the son of King Frederick." The goblet slipped from Thomas's numb fingers, wine spilling across the stone floor like blood. He stared at Lady Catherine, waiting for her to laugh, to tell him this was some elaborate jest. But her expression remained grave. "That's impossible," he managed to say. "I'm nobody. I'm an orphan who was raised by strangers. The king has one son, Prince Alexander, and Prince Alexander is your half-brother," Lady Catherine interrupted gently. "Frederick's second son, not his first." The room seemed to tilt around Thomas. He gripped the arms of his chair, struggling to process what he was hearing. "You're saying that I have a claim to the throne?" "Not just a claim, Thomas. By law, by right of birth, you are the rightful heir to the kingdom of Valdoria." Lady Catherine moved to a wooden chest in the corner of the room and withdrew a collection of documents. "Your mother was Isabella Marlowe, daughter of Earl Richard Marlowe. She and Frederick were deeply in love, but their union was opposed by the court. When Isabella became pregnant, Frederick intended to marry her despite the political consequences. But she died in childbirth, and Frederick, mad with grief, made a terrible decision." She spread the documents across a small table, birth records, testimony from servants, official correspondence. Frederick's advisors convinced him that acknowledging you would only serve as a painful reminder of what he had lost. They arranged for you to be taken away, told the world that you had died with your mother, and pressured Frederick into the advantageous marriage with Queen Eleanor that produced Prince Alexander. Thomas stared at the documents without really seeing them. His entire life, everything he thought he knew about himself, was crumbling away. Why are you telling me this now? Why keep the secret for so long only to reveal it? Lady Catherine's expression grew troubled. Because I fear the secret is no longer safe. Last night, someone was in Queen Eleanor's old chambers. The letters I had hidden there, the evidence I had gathered, I believe it may have been discovered. Who would have access to those rooms? Very few people. The king, Prince Alexander, the royal chamberlain, or perhaps one of the guards on special duty. Lady Catherine began to pace, her anxiety evident. If the wrong person has learned the truth, they might use it to create chaos in the kingdom. I needed you to know before anyone else could tell you, possibly with less gentle intentions. Thomas stood up abruptly, moving to the window. The kingdom spread out before him looked the same as it had every morning for 5 years. But now everything felt different. Those were not just fields and villages below. They were lands that might be his responsibility, people who might be his subjects. Prince Alexander, he said slowly. He's a good man. The people love him. He's prepared his whole life to be king. Yes, Lady Catherine agreed sadly. Which makes this situation all the more tragic. Neither of you deserves to be put in this position. Then, perhaps we don't have to be. Thomas turned back to her, a desperate hope in his voice. The secret has been kept for 20 years. Perhaps it can be kept longer. Perhaps forever. Lady Catherine shook her head. I wish that were possible, my dear boy. But secrets this significant have a way of surfacing, especially in times of political tension. The kingdom is not as stable as it appears. There are nobles who would use any weakness in the crown to advance their own positions. She moved to stand beside him at the window. Moreover, keeping this secret requires the cooperation of everyone who knows it. The servants who witnessed your birth are aging. Some have already died, but others remain. The church officials who recorded the documents might speak if pressed. And now, someone has potentially discovered the evidence I gathered. Thomas felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. What happens if I press my claim? Civil war, Lady Catherine answered without hesitation. The kingdom would tear itself apart. Those who support you would fight those who support Alexander. And thousands would die for a conflict neither of you wanted. And if I don't, you live forever as a pretender in your own kingdom, watching your half-brother rule what should rightfully be yours. And you pray that no one else ever discovers the truth, and forces the confrontation anyway. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, overwhelmed by the impossible choice before him. Does the king know you're telling me this? Lady Catherine's silence was answer enough. He doesn't know you even found out about me, does he? No, she admitted. Frederick believes the secret died with the servants who helped hide you away. He has no idea that I spent years tracking down the truth, that I found you, that I brought you to court. Why did you? Thomas asked. What did you hope to accomplish? Lady Catherine was quiet for so long that Thomas wondered if she would answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with regret. I told myself it was justice, that you deserved to know your heritage, to have a chance at your birthright. But if I'm honest, she paused, struggling with her admission. I was thinking of my own future as well. I never gave Frederick an heir. When he dies, and Alexander becomes king, my position becomes precarious. But if you were to claim the throne, I would be grateful to the woman who made it possible. Thomas finished, understanding flooding through him. You would be secure. Yes, Lady Catherine whispered. I am not proud of my calculations, but I cannot deny them either. Thomas felt a mixture of disappointment and understanding. Lady Catherine had saved him from obscurity, given him opportunities he never would have had otherwise. But her motivations had been more complex than he had realized. At least you're honest about it, he said finally. That's more than many would be. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lady Catherine quickly gathered the documents, hiding them beneath a cloth before calling out permission to enter. A young servant girl appeared, curtsying nervously. Forgive the interruption, my lady, but Prince Alexander requests Lord Thomas's presence in the war room immediately. He says it's a matter of urgent security. Thomas and Lady Catherine exchanged meaningful looks. The timing could not be coincidental. Tell His Highness that Lord Thomas will attend him shortly, Lady Catherine replied. After the servant left, Thomas turned to Lady Catherine with grim determination. It seems the decision may be taken out of our hands. It appears so. She moved to the chest and withdrew a small object wrapped in silk. Before you go, there is one more thing you should have. She unwrapped a gold signet ring bearing a coat of arms that Thomas didn't recognize. This belonged to your mother. It was the only thing of hers that I was able to recover. The design shows the Marlowe family crest combined with the royal arms of Valdoria. It was made to commemorate her betrothal to your father. Thomas took the ring with reverent care. It was the first tangible connection he had ever had to his birth parents. The gold was warm in his palm, and he could imagine his mother wearing it, planning for a wedding that would never happen and a future that would be cut short. Whatever happens in the coming days, Lady Catherine said softly, remember that you have choices. You don't have to claim the throne simply because it's your right. But you also don't have to renounce it simply to avoid conflict. Thomas slipped the ring onto his finger, where it fit perfectly. And what would you have me do? I would have you follow your conscience and do what you believe is best for the kingdom, even if it costs us both dearly. As Thomas prepared to leave, Lady Catherine caught his arm. One more thing. Prince Alexander is not your enemy, no matter how this unfolds. Remember that. Whatever conflict may arise between you comes from circumstances beyond either of your control. Thomas nodded, though privately he wondered how such noble intentions would survive the reality of political necessity. As he made his way through the castle toward the war room, he could feel the weight of the signet ring on his finger, a constant reminder that his life had just changed forever. The castle corridors that had been his home for 5 years now felt foreign and strange. Servants bowed to him as they always had, unaware that they might be showing deference to their future king. Guards nodded respectfully, not knowing they might soon be sworn to protect his life above all others. As he approached the war room, Thomas could hear voices through the heavy wooden door. Prince Alexander was speaking in low, urgent tones with someone whose voice Thomas couldn't identify. The conversation stopped abruptly when Thomas knocked. Enter, came Alexander's familiar voice. Thomas stepped into the room to find Prince Alexander standing behind a large oak table covered with maps and documents. Beside him stood Captain Marcus Thornfield, the loyal guard whose discretion and dedication were legendary throughout the castle. Prince Alexander looked up as Thomas entered, and, for a moment, their eyes met with an intensity that hadn't been there before. Thomas wondered if he was imagining it, or if something in his own expression had changed now that he knew the truth. Thomas, Alexander said, his voice carefully neutral. Thank you for coming so quickly. We have a matter of security to discuss that requires your particular expertise. But, as Thomas looked at the documents spread across the table, he realized with a sinking heart that the conversation about to take place would have nothing to do with his expertise in economic matters. The papers before them were the same ones he had just seen in Lady Catherine's tower. The confrontation that would determine the future of the kingdom was about to begin. The silence in the war room stretched like a taut bowstring ready to snap. Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the familiar documents spread across the table, the same papers Lady Catherine had shown him less than an hour before. Captain Thornfield's weathered face was a mask of professional composure, but Thomas could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested unconsciously near his sword hilt. Prince Alexander moved around the table with deliberate slowness, his royal bearing evident in every step. At 28, he possessed the natural authority that came from a lifetime of preparation for kingship, but today there was something different in his manner, a careful control that suggested emotions held firmly in check. Please, close the door, Alexander said quietly. Thomas did as requested, the soft click of the latch seeming unnaturally loud in the heavy atmosphere. When he turned back, he found both men watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. I trust you recognize these documents, Alexander continued, gesturing to the papers on the table. Thomas forced himself to remain calm, though his heart was racing. I'm not certain what you mean, Your Highness. Come now, Thomas. We've known each other for 5 years. There's no need for pretense between us. Alexander picked up one of the letters, holding it delicately between his fingers. Captain Thornfield discovered these in my mother's sealed chambers. Letters written by my stepmother. Documents that tell a rather extraordinary tale about your true identity. The pretense was over, then. Thomas moved closer to the table, noting how Captain Thornfield shifted slightly to maintain a clear line of sight to both men. The guard's loyalty was to Prince Alexander, but Thomas could see that Marcus was struggling with the implications of what he had discovered. "What would you have me say?" Thomas asked finally. "I learned of my heritage only this morning." "Did you?" Alexander's tone was neutral, but Thomas detected a note of skepticism. "Lady Catherine has been planning this revelation for years, according to her correspondence. You expect me to believe you were completely ignorant of her intentions?" Thomas met Alexander's gaze steadily. "I expect nothing, Your Highness. I can only tell you the truth. Until today, I believed myself to be an orphan of noble birth who owed everything to Lady Catherine's kindness. I had no idea that I was the king's son." Captain Thornfield spoke for the first time since Thomas had entered. "The letters suggest otherwise, my lord. Lady Catherine wrote extensively about preparing you for the revelation, about subtle ways she was educating you about royal protocol and statecraft." "Perhaps she was," Thomas acknowledged. "But if so, I interpreted it as the natural education of a young man being groomed for court service. I thought she was preparing me to be a better advisor, not a potential king." Alexander set down the letter and picked up another document. "This is a birth certificate, signed by Father Benedict of the Church of St. Michael. It clearly identifies you as Thomas Frederick Marlowe, legitimate son of King Frederick and Isabella Marlowe. The date predates my own birth by 14 months. The weight of those words settled over the room like a shroud. 14 months. By the law of primogeniture that governed Valdorian succession, those 14 months meant everything. "I didn't ask to be born first," Thomas said quietly. "No," Alexander replied, his composure beginning to show cracks. "But you were. The question now is what you intend to do about it." Thomas looked at his half-brother. The word felt strange even in his thoughts, and saw a man grappling with the collapse of everything he had believed about his destiny. Alexander had spent his entire life preparing to be king, had made countless sacrifices for duty, had shaped every aspect of his character around the requirements of leadership. Now he was being told that it had all been founded on a lie. "What do you think I should do?" Thomas asked. Alexander's laugh was bitter. "You're asking me to advise you on whether you should claim the throne that is rightfully yours? That's rather cruel, don't you think?" "I'm asking because I genuinely don't know," Thomas said with growing frustration. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I asked Lady Catherine to destroy my peaceful life with revelations that turned everything upside down? I've been at court for 5 years, Alexander. 5 years of watching you prepare to be king, of seeing the love and respect you command from nobles and commoners alike. Do you really think I want to tear the kingdom apart in a civil war?" "Then, don't," Alexander said sharply. "Renounce any claim to the throne. Publicly acknowledge my legitimacy, and swear fealty to me as your king." The request hung in the air between them, reasonable and impossible in equal measure. Thomas felt the weight of the signet ring on his finger, the tangible connection to parents he had never known, and a birthright he had never sought. "And what happens when others discover the truth?" Thomas asked. "What happens when ambitious nobles decide to use my claim as a weapon against you? Do you think my renunciation would stop them from dragging me into their plots?" Captain Thornfield stepped forward slightly. "With respect, both my lords, this conversation is premature. We must first consider how many others know this secret, and what they intend to do with the knowledge." Alexander nodded grimly. "Marcus is right. Lady Catherine has been building this case for years. She must have allies, people who helped her gather evidence and testimony. The question is whether they're prepared to act. There's something else to consider," Thomas added reluctantly. "Lady Catherine believes someone else may have discovered the evidence before Captain Thornfield. She noticed that her hiding place had been disturbed." Both Alexander and Marcus turned to stare at him. "When?" Alexander demanded. "She mentioned it this morning. She thought someone had been in Queen Eleanor's chambers recently, possibly the night before last." Marcus's expression grew troubled. "I found the door ajar and papers on the desk. If someone else was there before me, they would have seen everything I saw. Alexander began pacing, his mind clearly working through the implications. If word is already spreading, we may not have the luxury of choosing how to handle this situation. Events may be taken out of our hands. Perhaps that would be for the best, Thomas said quietly. If the choice is made for us, at least we don't have to live with the consequences of our decisions. No, Alexander turned on him fiercely. I won't allow this kingdom to descend into chaos because we were too cowardly to make hard choices. If you have a legitimate claim to the throne, then we face it directly and find a solution that serves the realm. Thomas was struck by Alexander's response. Even faced with the potential loss of everything he had worked toward, the prince's first concern was for the kingdom's welfare. It was exactly the kind of selfless leadership that made Alexander beloved by his people. What do you propose? Thomas asked. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. First, we need to know exactly who else has knowledge of this situation. Marcus, I want you to investigate discreetly. Find out if anyone else has been asking questions about the sealed chambers or showing unusual interest in documents from 20 years ago. Yes, Your Highness. Second, we need to speak with my father. He's the only one who can confirm the truth of these allegations and explain the decisions he made. Thomas felt a chill at the prospect of confronting the man who had abandoned him as an infant. And if he confirms it all, then we deal with reality, not fantasy, Alexander replied firmly. We find a solution that preserves the stability of the kingdom while honoring the legitimate claims of both parties. Is such a solution possible? Marcus asked. Alexander's smile was grim. It has to be. The alternative is civil war, and I won't let that happen if there's any way to prevent it. Thomas found himself admiring Alexander's determination even as he wondered if his half-brother truly understood the magnitude of what they were facing. And what if your father orders you to step aside? What if he commands you to acknowledge my claim? Then I will obey my king and my father, Alexander said without hesitation. But I will also ensure that you're prepared for the responsibilities you would inherit. The simple nobility of the statement struck Thomas like a physical blow. Here was a man willing to sacrifice his life's ambition for duty and honor, while Thomas himself was still struggling to accept responsibilities he had never wanted. You're a better man than I am, Thomas said softly. No, Alexander replied, his expression softening slightly. I'm a man who has had 28 years to prepare for kingship. You've had one morning to adjust to the possibility. The difference is experience, not character. A knock at the door interrupted them. At Alexander's call to enter, a messenger appeared, bowing deeply. Your Highness, forgive the interruption. King Frederick requests your immediate presence in the throne room. He says it's a matter that cannot wait. The three men exchanged glances. The timing could hardly be coincidental. Did he say whether anyone else was to attend? Alexander asked. Yes, Your Highness. He specifically requested that Lord Thomas and Captain Thornfield accompany you. After the messenger left, they stood in silence for a moment, each processing the significance of the summons. King Frederick somehow knew. Whether he had been informed by the mysterious person who had discovered the documents first, or whether Lady Catherine had confessed her actions, the secret was no longer contained among the few people in the room. Well, Alexander said finally, it seems the decision about when to confront this situation has been made for us. Thomas felt a strange mix of relief and terror. The waiting was over, but what came next could determine the fate of everyone in the kingdom. Before we go, he said, there's something I need you both to understand. Whatever my birthright might be, I have no desire to be the cause of bloodshed. If there's a way to resolve this that preserves peace, I'm willing to consider any option, including renouncing my claim. Alexander studied him for a long moment. And, if our father commands you to accept the crown, then I suppose I'll have to learn very quickly what it means to be a king. Captain Thornfield, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke. For what it's worth, both my lords, the kingdom would be fortunate to have either of you as its ruler. The tragedy is that circumstances may force you to be enemies when you should be allies. As they prepared to leave for what might be the most important conversation in the kingdom's recent history, Thomas caught Alexander's arm. Whatever happens in that throne room, I want you to know that I never intended for any of this. And if I am forced to claim the crown, I would want you as my closest advisor. The kingdom needs your wisdom and experience." Alexander's expression was unreadable. "And if I retain the throne? Then you'll have my complete loyalty, as you always have." They walked through the castle corridors in silence, three men carrying the weight of a secret that could reshape a kingdom. Servants and courtiers bowed as Prince Alexander passed, unaware that they might be looking at their future king for the last time or witnessing the first public appearance of his successor. The throne room doors loomed ahead, massive oak panels that had witnessed centuries of royal proclamations, declarations of war, treaties of peace, and moments that had shaped the destiny of nations. Whatever happened on the other side of those doors would join that long history, another crucial moment when the fate of a kingdom hung in the balance. Thomas touched the signet ring on his finger one more time, drawing strength from the connection to the mother he had never known. Then, together, the three men stepped forward to face a truth that had been hidden for 20 years and could no longer be denied.